Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm your host, and today I'm bringing you one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. Before we dive into this nightmare, let me just say that what happened in that abandoned retirement home in Massachusetts has haunted me for months. And what I'm about to tell you will change how you think about abandoned places forever. I can see that 80% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. If you enjoy these horror stories and want to support the channel, please hit that subscribe button. Also, smash the like button if this story gives you chills. And don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest terrifying content. I'd love to know where you're watching this from. Drop a comment below and tell me your country. Also, let me know what time you're watching this video. Are you brave enough to listen at midnight? And if you have any horror stories of your own, please share them in the comments below or email me. I love reading your experiences. Because trust me, after what happened to me, I know these things are real. Now, let's get into what happened at the Whitmore retirement home in Massachusetts. And why I'll never be the same again. It was a cold October evening when I first heard about the Whitmore retirement home. The year was 2019, and I had been exploring abandoned places for about 3 years. My friend Rowan, who's also into urban exploration, sent me a message that would change everything. He discovered this place through some old newspaper articles from the 1980s. But what he found in those articles made us both lose sleep for weeks. The retirement home had been abandoned for over 15 years. It was located about 2 hours outside of Boston, hidden deep in the woods of Massachusetts. The building had been shut down after a series of unexplained deaths. The official reports claimed it was due to negligence, but the locals whispered about something much darker. Something that made grown men refuse to drive past the place after sunset. Rowan and I spent weeks planning this exploration. We studied old blueprints, satellite images, and read every article we could find about the place. What we discovered made our blood run cold. Between 1975 and 1984, over 40 residents had died under mysterious circumstances. The deaths were never properly investigated, and the few surviving staff members who were willing to talk spoke of things that shouldn't exist. Things that wandered the halls long after visiting hours had ended. One article particularly disturbed us. It was from a local newspaper, dated October 31st, 1983. The headline read, "Whitmore staff member found catatonic, claims residents never left." The article described how a night shift nurse named Margaret Collins had been discovered sitting in the facility's chapel, staring at the wall and whispering the names of deceased residents over and over again. When questioned by police, she claimed that every night she would see the residents who had passed away walking the halls, sitting in the common areas, even attending meal times. She insisted they were trying to tell her something important, but she could never understand what they wanted. Margaret was committed to a psychiatric facility shortly after. She died there 3 months later. The cause of death was listed as failure to thrive, but according to the attending physician's notes, which Rowan had somehow managed to access through a contact at the hospital, Margaret had simply stopped eating, stopped drinking, stopped responding to any stimuli. She would only speak when asked about the retirement home, and then she would beg them not to make her go back. Even though she was miles away and the facility was still operational at the time. The night before our expedition, I couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong. I kept having dreams about empty hallways and the sound of wheelchairs rolling across broken floors. But these weren't ordinary dreams. They were vivid, realistic. I could smell the antiseptic, feel the cold air, hear the whispered conversations of people who shouldn't be there. In one particularly disturbing dream, I was walking through a long corridor lined with doors. Behind each door, I could hear someone calling my name, begging me to come in. to stay with them, to never leave. I woke up in a cold sweat at 3:33 a.m. The exact time, I would later learn, when most of the mysterious deaths at Whitmore had occurred. But my curiosity was stronger than my fear. I had to see this place for myself. I had to know what really happened in those halls. What made an entire facility shut down overnight, leaving behind personal belongings, medical records, even half-eaten meals on the tables. Rowan picked me up at 8 p.m. that Friday evening. He looked as tired as I felt. "Did you have the dreams too?" he asked without preamble. I nodded, and we both knew we were walking into something that defied explanation. But we couldn't turn back now. We had invested too much time, too much research, and frankly, too much of ourselves into this exploration. The drive to the retirement home took us through increasingly remote areas of Massachusetts. The further we got from civilization, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The trees seemed to lean in over the road, creating a tunnel of darkness that our headlights barely penetrated. We passed maybe 3 other cars in the entire 2-hour journey. And each time, Rowan would glance in his rearview mirror and comment on how quickly they disappeared from view, as if they couldn't wait to get away from this area. We arrived at the location around 10 p.m. The October air was crisp, and fog was beginning to roll in from the nearby forest. The retirement home stood like a dark monument against the night sky. It was a massive 4-story building, with broken windows that looked like hollow eye sockets staring down at us. But what struck me most was the silence. In all my years of urban exploration, I had never encountered a place so completely devoid of sound. No insects, no wind rustling through leaves, no distant traffic. Nothing. Just an oppressive, heavy silence that seemed to press against our eardrums. Rowan parked his truck about a quarter-mile away from the main entrance. We didn't want to attract attention from local authorities. Though, as we would later discover, the local police had an unofficial policy of not patrolling this area after dark. As we walked through the overgrown parking lot, our flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing abandoned wheelchairs and rusted medical equipment scattered everywhere. But there was something systematic about the arrangement, as if someone had been organizing these items. Recently, one wheelchair in particular caught my attention. It was positioned perfectly in the center of what used to be a parking space, facing directly toward the main entrance of the building. The metal was rusted, but the seat cushion looked almost new, and there were fresh tire tracks leading up to it, as if someone had been using it just hours before we arrived. "Rowan," I called out, pointing to the wheelchair. "Look at this." He came over and examined it with his flashlight. His face went pale. "Those tracks," he whispered. "They're not tire tracks." "Look closer." I crouched down and studied the marks in the dirt. He was right. These weren't tire tracks. They were drag marks. Long, deep grooves in the earth, as if something heavy had been pulled across the ground. Something that didn't want to be moved. The main entrance was secured with chains and boards, but Rowan had found a side entrance during his reconnaissance visit the week before. As we made our way around the building, I noticed that many of the first-floor windows had been boarded up from the inside, not the outside, as if someone had been trying to keep something in rather than keeping people out. The side entrance was a heavy metal door that led into what appeared to be a service area. Rowan had managed to pry it open just enough for us to squeeze through. As we approached the gap, the smell hit us immediately. It was a mixture of decay, mold, and something else. Something that reminded me of old flowers left too long in stagnant water. But underneath it all was another scent. Something medical. Like the smell of a hospital room where someone had been sick for a very long time. "Jesus," Rowan muttered, covering his nose with his shirt. "It's stronger than last week. You came here before." I asked, surprised. "Just to check the entrance," he said quickly. I didn't go inside. But the smell, it's definitely gotten worse. As we squeezed through the gap, I felt something brush against my jacket. I spun around, shining my flashlight back through the opening, but there was nothing there. Just the empty parking lot and that lone wheelchair staring back at us. But I could have sworn I felt fingers. Cold, skeletal fingers trying to grab onto my clothing. The service area we entered was small and cramped, filled with industrial equipment and supply shelves. But everything was covered in a thick layer of dust except for one narrow path through the middle of the room. A path that looked like it had been used recently. And often, the footprints in the dust were small, like those of elderly people wearing soft-soled shoes. Rowan noticed them too. "There shouldn't be footprints," he said quietly. "This place has been abandoned for 15 years. We followed the path through the service area to another door. This one led into the main lobby. As we opened it, our flashlights revealed a scene that made us both take a step back. The lobby was in complete ruins. Ceiling tiles had fallen to the floor, exposing rusty pipes and electrical wires. Water damage had stained the walls with dark, organic patterns that looked almost intentional, like some kind of abstract art created by moisture and time. In the center of the room stood an old reception desk, its surface covered in years of dust and debris. But sitting on top of the desk, perfectly clean and apparently recently placed, was a visitor's logbook. I approached the desk cautiously and opened the logbook. The last entry was dated 3 days ago. In shaky handwriting, someone had written, "Visiting my mother, room 127. She's been waiting for me." The signature was illegible, but at the bottom of the page, in different handwriting, someone had added, "She decided to stay." "This doesn't make sense," I said, showing the entry to Rowan. "Who would be visiting anyone here? The place has been empty for over a decade." Rowan studied the entry, his face growing increasingly pale. "Look at the other entries," he said, flipping through the pages. "There are dozens of them. All recent. All saying the same thing." He was right. Page after page of entries, all dated within the last 2 years. "Visiting father, room 89. He looks so peaceful. Came to see grandma, room 156. She made me tea. Checking on Uncle Harold, room 203. He says the others are lonely." And at the bottom of each entry, in that same different handwriting, "Decided to stay." "This place is massive," Rowan whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space. "According to the blueprints, there are 4 floors, plus a basement." He paused, looking around at the destroyed lobby. "But according to this logbook, people are still living here. We decided to start with the ground floor and work our way up." As we moved deeper into the building, our footsteps seemed unnaturally loud on the broken tiles. Every few steps, we hear something. A creak, a groan, the sound of something settling in the walls. But there were other sounds, too. Sounds that made us stop and listen carefully. The distant murmur of conversation. The soft padding of footsteps on carpet. The gentle squeak of wheelchair wheels rolling across linoleum. The first room we entered was what used to be the dining hall. Long tables were still arranged throughout the space, some overturned, others still set with plastic plates and cups. It was as if the residents had just disappeared mid-meal. On one table, I found a newspaper dated September 15th, 1984. The headline read, "Whitmore Retirement Home 2 closed following investigation." But as I picked up the paper, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The paper was still damp, as if it had been delivered that morning. "Rowan," I called out softly. "Look at this." But when I turned around, he was standing at the far end of the dining hall, completely motionless. His flashlight was pointed at something in the corner of the room, and his face had gone completely white. "What is it?" I asked, walking over to him. He didn't respond, just kept staring into the shadows. I followed his gaze and saw what had captured his attention. In the corner of the room, barely visible in the shadows, was a dining table set for two. But unlike the other tables, this one was clean. The plates were polished, the silverware arranged perfectly, and there were fresh flowers in a small vase in the center. 2 chairs were pulled up to the table, and in one of them sat a figure. At first, I thought it was just shadows playing tricks on my eyes. But as I stared harder, I could make out the silhouette of an elderly person, hunched over slightly, wearing what looked like a hospital gown. The figure was completely still, but I had the distinct impression that it was watching us. "Rowan," I whispered. "Do you see that?" Before he could answer, the figure at the table slowly raised one arm and waved at us. A gentle, friendly wave, like a grandmother greeting her grandchildren. We both stumbled backward, our flashlights dancing wildly across the walls. When we regained our composure and pointed the lights back at the corner table, it was empty. Just an old, dust-covered table with broken chairs scattered around it. But the smell of fresh flowers lingered in the air. "Did you see that?" Rowan finally managed to whisper. I nodded, not trusting my voice. We stood there for several minutes, waiting for our hearts to stop racing. Then, from somewhere deeper in the building, we heard the sound of a dinner bell ringing. 3 long, deliberate chimes, followed by the unmistakable sound of chairs being pushed back from tables and dozens of people shuffling toward the dining hall. "We need to hide," I hissed, grabbing Rowan's arm. We ducked behind an overturned table just as the first figures began entering the dining hall. I counted at least 20 of them. Elderly men and women in various states of dress. Some wore hospital gowns, others were in pajamas and robes. A few were still in the clothes they had probably died in decades ago. They moved slowly, deliberately, some using walkers or canes, others supporting each other. What terrified me most was how normal it all seemed. They were chatting quietly among themselves, complaining about the weather, discussing what they hoped would be served for dinner. One elderly man helped a woman in a wheelchair navigate around a pile of debris. Another couple walked arm in arm, the man telling his companion about a dream he'd had about their grandson visiting. They took their seats at the tables as if the dining hall wasn't a ruin, as if the ceiling wasn't partially collapsed and the walls weren't stained with decades of water damage. To them, apparently, everything was exactly as it had been in 1984. They were still living their lives, still going through the motions of daily existence, completely unaware that they had died years ago. A figure that appeared to be a staff member entered the dining hall, carrying a large serving tray. She was a middle-aged woman in a nurse's uniform, her graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. She began serving the residents, placing plates of what looked like perfectly normal food in front of each person. But as she got closer to our hiding spot, I could see that the plates were empty, and the nurse's face was gaunt and hollow, her eyes sunken and dark. "Good evening, everyone," the nurse said in a cheerful voice that sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "I hope you all had a pleasant day. We have some lovely visitors tonight." She paused and looked directly at our hiding spot. "Perhaps they'd like to join us for dinner." The entire room fell silent. Every head turned in our direction. Dozens of pairs of eyes, some bright and alert, others cloudy with cataracts, all staring at the overturned table where we crouched. But these weren't the eyes of the living. They were the eyes of people who had been waiting for a very long time, waiting for someone to acknowledge them, to remember them, to stay with them. "Come out," said an elderly man at the nearest table. His voice was kind, grandfatherly. "Don't be afraid. We're all friends here. We've been so lonely," added a woman in a faded pink nightgown, It's been such a long time since we've had guests. Rowan and I looked at each other. We both knew we had to move, but we were surrounded. The only exit was behind the residence, and they were all watching us with those expectant, hungry eyes. Slowly, we stood up. The residents smiled and began clapping. Soft, polite applause, like they were welcoming new arrivals to their community. "Welcome to Whitmore," said the nurse, walking toward us. "You must be tired after your journey. Why don't you sit down and have something to eat?" We were just exploring. I managed to stammer. "We didn't mean to disturb anyone." "Disturb us," laughed an elderly man with a walker. "My dear boy, you haven't disturbed us. You've made us the happiest we've been in years. New faces, new friends, new family members." "Family members," Rowan whispered beside me. "Of course," said the woman in the pink nightgown. "Everyone who comes to Whitmore becomes family. We take care of each other here. We make sure no one is ever lonely, ever forgotten." The nurse had reached us now. Up close, I could see that her uniform was stained and torn, and her skin had a waxy, translucent quality. But her smile was warm and genuine. The smile of someone who truly cared about the people in her charge. "I'm Nurse Patricia," she said, extending a cold, bony hand. "I've been taking care of our residents since 1975, and now I get to take care of you too." I didn't want to shake her hand, but something compelled me to reach out. Her grip was firm and surprisingly strong, but her skin felt like ice, and I could swear I felt no pulse in her wrist. "Let me show you to your rooms," Nurse Patricia continued. "I think you'll be very comfortable here. Room 127 and room 129 are available, right next to each other, so you can visit whenever you like." "Actually," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "we need to get back. People are expecting us." The dining hall fell silent again. The residents looked at each other with expressions of confusion and disappointment. "Expecting you?" asked the elderly man with the walker. But no one knows you're here. No one ever knows when visitors come to Whitmore." "That's not true," I said quickly. "Our friends know where we are. They'll come looking for us if we don't return." Nurse Patricia's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, my dear," she said sadly, "I'm afraid that's not possible. You see, time works differently here at Whitmore. Once you arrive, the outside world simply forgets about you. It's better that way, really. No worries about jobs or bills or relationships. Just peace and family and the knowledge that you'll never be alone again." I felt panic rising in my chest. "What are you talking about?" "Show them," called out the woman in the pink nightgown. "Show them the others." Nurse Patricia nodded and walked over to a wall covered with framed photographs. "These are all our family members," she said proudly. "Residents who lived here, staff who worked here, and visitors who decided to stay." She pointed to a section of newer photographs. My blood turned to ice as I recognized the faces. Urban explorers, photographers, local teenagers who had probably come here on dares. All of them looked happy in the photos, but their eyes were empty, vacant, like there was nothing behind them. "This is Jason," Nurse Patricia said, pointing to a photo of a young man with a camera. "He came here last year to take pictures for a magazine article. He was so impressed with our community that he decided to become our official photographer." "And this is Melissa." She pointed to another photo. She was exploring with her boyfriend. They both joined our family. They're on the 3rd floor now. They love it here. Rowan grabbed my arm. "We need to go," he whispered. "Now," but as we turned toward the exit, we found our way blocked by more residents. They had quietly surrounded us, while Nurse Patricia was showing us the photographs. They weren't threatening. Just standing there. Smiling. Waiting. "Please don't leave," said an elderly woman with kind eyes. "We've been so lonely. It's been months since our last visitors. Stay for dinner at least," added another resident. Nurse Patricia is an excellent cook. I looked around the dining hall. There had to be 50 residents now, all watching us, all waiting for our decision. The temperature in the room seemed to be dropping. I could see my breath in the beam of my flashlight. "Just one night," said Nurse Patricia. "What could it hurt? Just one night with people who understand what it's like to be forgotten, to be abandoned, to be left behind by a world that doesn't care." Something in her words resonated with me. How many times had I felt forgotten, overlooked, invisible to the people around me? Here was a place where I would be welcomed, valued, remembered forever. The idea was almost tempting. I glanced at Rowan and saw that he was struggling with the same thoughts. His expression had softened, become more receptive. He was actually considering their offer. "Rowan," I hissed, elbowing him in the ribs. "Snap out of it." He blinked and shook his head, as if waking from a trance. Yeah, we need to go." But the residents were closing in now. Not aggressively. Just moving closer. Reducing our options. Their faces filled with desperate hope. "Please," said the woman in the pink nightgown, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please don't leave us. We've been waiting so long for someone to care about us." That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The tears on her face weren't clear. They were dark, thick, like blood mixed with old water. And as I looked around the room, I saw that many of the other residents were crying similar tears. Dark stains running down their pale faces. "Rowan," I whispered. "Look at their faces." He followed my gaze and went pale. Oh God, the residents were beginning to change. Their kindly, grandfatherly appearances were fading, revealing something underneath. Something that had been dead for decades. Their skin became more translucent. Their eyes more sunken. Their smiles more forced and unnatural. But they were still talking. Still pleading with us to stay. Their voices beginning to overlap and blend together into a chorus of loneliness and desperation. "Don't leave us. Stay with us. Be our family. Remember us. Love us. Never forget us." The sound was overwhelming. Desperate voices piling on top of each other. Growing louder and more insistent. I could feel my willpower weakening. My desire to escape fading. These people needed us. They had been alone for so long. What kind of person would I be if I abandoned them now? "No," I shouted, forcing myself to think clearly. "We're not staying. We're not becoming part of your collection." The dining hall erupted in wails and moans. The residents reached out toward us, their movements becoming more urgent, more desperate. Nurse Patricia's friendly demeanor completely disappeared, replaced by something cold and predatory. "You will stay," she said, her voice now carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "You will join our family. You will never be lonely again." Rowan and I ran toward the exit, pushing past the residents who tried to block our way. Their hands were ice cold, their grips surprisingly strong. But desperation gave us strength. We burst through the dining hall doors and into the main corridor. Behind us, I could hear Nurse Patricia giving orders. "Follow them. Don't let them reach the exits. Bring them back to us." We ran down the corridor, our flashlights bouncing wildly as we searched for a way out. But the building seemed different now. The hallways were longer. The rooms were in different locations. Doors that should have led outside now opened onto empty closets or dead ends. "This way," Rowan gasped, pulling me toward a staircase. "No," I said, remembering something from our research. "The upper floors are worse. More residents. More spirits. We need to find the original exit." But as we looked back down the corridor, we could see them coming. Dozens of figures shuffling toward us. Their movements slow but relentless. Like zombies in a horror movie. Except these weren't mindless undead. These were people who remembered being alive. Who remembered what it felt like to be loved and cared for. And who would do anything to feel that way again. "The basement," I said suddenly. "There might be another way out through the basement." Rowan looked at me like I was insane. "Are you kidding? Basements are always worse in these situations." "Not worse," I said, trying to think clearly despite the growing sounds of pursuit behind us. "Different. The basement is where they kept the medical equipment. The records. The things they want to hide. Maybe it's where we can find answers. Maybe it's where we can find a way to help them." "Help them?" Rowan stared at me. "They're trying to trap us here forever. Because they're in pain," I said, the realization hitting me suddenly. "Think about it. They're not evil. They're just lonely. Desperate. They've been forgotten by the world. Abandoned by their families. They died alone and scared, and their spirits can't move on because no one remembers them. No one mourns them." The pursuing figures were getting closer. I could hear Nurse Patricia calling out to us. "Come back, children. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. We just want to love you." "Fine," Rowan said. "Basement it is. But if we die down there, I'm blaming you." We found the basement entrance near the back of the building. A heavy metal door with peeling paint and rust stains. It was slightly ajar, and a cold draft was flowing up from below. The smell was stronger here. That mixture of decay and old flowers, but now there was something else. Something medical, like disinfectant mixed with death. As we opened the door wider, we could hear them behind us. The residents spreading out through the building. Searching every room. Calling our names, begging us to come back to them. The basement stairs were metal, and they rang out with each step. My flashlight revealed a long underground corridor with rooms branching off on both sides. But this wasn't like the upper floors. This area felt different. Purposeful, like it had been designed for something specific. Something that the administrators of the retirement home hadn't wanted the public to know about. "Rowan," I called out as we reached the bottom. "Are you okay?" There was no answer. I turned around and realized that Rowan wasn't behind me. I was alone in the basement corridor. Completely alone. "Rowan," I called out more loudly. "Where are you?" From somewhere deeper in the basement, I heard his voice. But it sounded strange, distant, like he was calling to me from the bottom of a well. "Down here," he said. "You have to see this." I followed the sound of his voice, passing room after room. Through the open doorways, I could see medical equipment. Old gurneys for stands, cabinets full of bottles and vials. But there were other things too. Things that didn't belong in a retirement home. Restraint tables. Electroshock equipment. Surgical instruments that looked more suited to a morgue than a medical facility. One room contained dozens of filing cabinets. I opened one of the drawers and found medical records dating back to the 1970s. But these weren't normal patient files. These were records of experiments. Psychological evaluations. Notes about behavioral modification techniques and terminal care protocols. One file caught my attention. It was for a patient named Serena Whitmore. The file was thick, filled with daily observation reports and treatment notes. According to the records, Serena had been admitted to the facility in 1980 at the age of 57. Her family had committed her after she began claiming that she could communicate with deceased relatives. The doctors had diagnosed her with senile dementia, with paranoid delusions, but as I read further into the file, a different picture emerged. Serena wasn't delusional. She was genuinely psychic, able to communicate with spirits. And the staff at Whitmore had been using her abilities for their own purposes, forcing her to contact the deceased residents, to keep them connected to the facility, to prevent their spirits from moving on. The final entry in Serena's file was dated October 31st, 1984. Patient expired at 0333 hours following final session. Cause of death listed as heart failure, but patient showed no signs of cardiac distress. Recommend immediate cremation to prevent complications. The rest of the entry was illegible, but the implication was clear. They had worked Serena to death, used her psychic abilities until her body couldn't take any more. "Rowan," I called out again, moving deeper into the basement. "This way," his voice echoed from the far end of the corridor. "You won't believe what I've found." At the end of the corridor was a large room. As I entered, my flashlight revealed something that made my knees weak. Rowan was standing in the center of the room, his back to me. But he wasn't alone. Surrounding him were dozens of figures. The residents from upstairs. But these were different. These were the people who had died during the experiments. Their bodies showed signs of the terrible things that had been done to them. Surgical scars, burn marks from electroshock therapy, restraint marks on their wrists and ankles. And standing directly in front of Rowan was a woman I recognized from a file I had just read. Serena Whitmore. She looked exactly as she had in the photograph. Silver hair, kind eyes. But her hospital gown was stained with blood, and there were electrode burns on her temples from the psychic experiments they had forced her to endure. "Rowan," I whispered. He turned around slowly. His eyes were different. Empty, like there was nothing behind them. When he spoke, his voice sounded like it was coming from far away. "They've been waiting," he said. "They've been waiting for so long." Serena stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice was soft but filled with a terrible sadness. "Welcome," she said. "I'm sorry about the others upstairs. They don't understand what really happened here. They think this was a normal retirement home. They think they lived out their natural lives and passed away peacefully." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. "The residents upstairs. Most of them died naturally. Old age, illness, accidents. They're trapped here because they were forgotten by their families. Abandoned and lonely. But we," she gestured to the figures around her, "we're different. We were murdered." My blood ran cold. "Murdered. The experiments," Serena continued. "The administrators of this facility were conducting illegal research. Psychological manipulation, sensory deprivation, surgical procedures without consent. They were trying to develop new methods of controlling elderly populations, making them more compliant, more manageable." "But why?" I asked, though my voice was barely a whisper. "Money," said another figure. An elderly man with surgical scars covering half his face. The government was paying them to develop new techniques. The families were paying them to keep us out of the way. Everyone profited except us. When some of us began to die from the experiments, Serena continued, they realized they needed a way to keep us quiet. That's when they discovered my abilities. They forced me to bind our spirits to this place, to keep us from moving on, from telling anyone what had really happened. But that was 40 years ago. I said, "Why are you still here?" "Because the binding is still in place," Serena replied. "My death didn't break it. It only made it stronger." And every year, more people are drawn to this place. Urban explorers, paranormal investigators, thrill seekers. Most of them join the residents upstairs, becoming part of their lonely community. But occasionally, someone like you comes along. Someone who might be able to help us. I looked at Rowan. He was still standing there, motionless, his eyes vacant. What did you do to him? Nothing permanent, Serena assured me. But he's sensitive to psychic energy. Much more so than you. Being in the presence of so many trapped spirits. It's overwhelming for him. He'll recover once we resolve this situation. What situation? Serena walked over to a wall covered with complex diagrams and symbols. This is the binding ritual they forced me to perform, she said. It links our spirits to the physical structure of the building. We can't leave. We can't move on. We can't find peace. But there's a way to break it. How? The ritual requires a living person to serve as a conduit, someone willing to sacrifice themselves to free the trapped spirits. But the process is dangerous. If it goes wrong, the living person becomes permanently bound to the facility, just like the rest of us. I felt my heart racing. And you want me to do it? It's the only way, Serena said, her eyes filled with desperation. We've been waiting decades for someone who could help us. Someone brave enough. Someone who cares enough about strangers to risk everything. I looked around at all the tortured souls surrounding me. These people had suffered unimaginable horrors. They had been experimented on, tortured, murdered, and then forced to remain trapped in the place of their torment for 40 years. How could I possibly walk away and leave them like this? But then I thought about my life outside. My family, my friends, everything I would be giving up. What exactly would I have to do? Serena led me to a table covered with old books and ritual implements. The binding ritual created a psychic anchor point, a focal point that keeps all our spirits connected to this building. That anchor point is located in the room where I died, the medical experimentation chamber on the sub-basement level. There's another level below this. Yes, Serena nodded grimly. That's where the worst experiments took place, where they kept the subjects who were too damaged to return to the general population. It's also where they stored the bodies of those who didn't survive. My stomach turned. Bodies, dozens of them, said the man with the surgical scars. Hidden away in freezers and morgue drawers. Never reported. Never buried. Never given the dignity of a proper funeral. Serena placed a yellowed piece of paper in front of me. It was covered with symbols and incantations written in what looked like dried blood. This is the counter-ritual, she explained. It requires someone living to read these words while standing at the exact center of the anchor point. But the psychic energy involved is enormous. The person performing the ritual absorbs all the pain and trauma of every spirit bound to this place. What does that mean exactly? It means you'll experience every moment of suffering we've endured, Serena said quietly. Every experiment, every torture session, every moment of fear and desperation. All of it will pass through you at once. I stared at the paper, trying to process what she was asking. And if I survive it, then we'll be free to move on, and you'll be able to leave this place. But if your mind can't handle the psychic trauma, Serena's voice trailed off. I'll end up like them, I finished, understanding the risk. We won't force you, Serena said. The choice has to be yours. But please, consider what it would mean to us. We've been in agony for so long, unable to rest, unable to find peace. This may be our only chance. I looked at Rowan, still standing there like a statue. What about him? Once the binding is broken, his psychic sensitivity will return to normal, Serena assured me. He'll be fine, but if we remain trapped here much longer, The constant exposure to our psychic energy could cause permanent damage to his mind. That decided it for me. I couldn't let Rowan suffer because of my decision. And I couldn't walk away knowing that dozens of innocent people were trapped in eternal torment. "All right," I said, my voice barely audible. "I'll do it." The gratitude on Serena's face was overwhelming. Tears of dark blood began flowing down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what this means to us. Just tell me what I need to do." Serena led me to a hidden staircase at the back of the room. "The sub-basement is accessed through here," she said, "but I must warn you. The psychic energy down there is incredibly intense. You may begin experiencing visions, hearing voices, feeling the pain of the experiments even before you begin the ritual." As we descended the narrow staircase, the temperature dropped dramatically. My breath was visible in the beam of my flashlight. The walls were lined with pipes and electrical conduits, but they were covered in a strange, organic-looking substance. It looked almost like dried blood mixed with some kind of fungal growth. "What is that stuff?" I asked, trying not to touch the walls. "The residue of 40 years of psychic trauma," Serena replied. "Pain and suffering, when intense enough, can actually manifest in physical form. This entire sub-basement is saturated with it." At the bottom of the stairs was a long corridor lined with heavy metal doors. Each door had a small window, and as we passed them, I could see into the rooms beyond. They were worse than anything I could have imagined. Operating tables with restraint systems, sensory deprivation chambers, rooms filled with electrical equipment designed to cause pain rather than healing. "Room 13, Serena said, stopping in front of a door at the end of the corridor. "This is where I died, where they pushed my psychic abilities beyond human limits." She opened the door and I stepped inside. The room was dominated by a large metal chair surrounded by electrical equipment. The chair had leather restraints on the arms and legs, and there were electrodes attached to cables that led to various machines. But in the center of the room was something that made my blood freeze. A perfect circle carved into the concrete floor. The circle was filled with symbols similar to those on the ritual paper, but these were carved deep and filled with what looked like dried blood. "The anchor point," Serena said. "You'll need to stand in the exact center and read the counter-ritual aloud." I walked to the center of the circle. As soon as my feet touched the carved symbols, I was hit by a wave of psychic energy so intense that I nearly collapsed. Images flashed through my mind. Serena strapped to the chair, electrodes attached to her head, men in medical coats watching as she screamed in agony, forcing her to contact spirits, to bind them to the facility, to create an eternal prison of suffering. "Are you all right?" Serena asked, her voice filled with concern. "I can see it," I gasped. "I can see what they did to you." "That's just the beginning," she said sadly. "Once you start reading the ritual, you will experience everything. Every subject they experimented on. Every person they tortured and killed." I pulled out the piece of paper with the counter-ritual. The words seemed to writhe and shift on the page, as if they were alive. "What language is this?" "A combination of Latin and an older language. Something they found in ancient texts about spirit binding," Serena replied. "Just read it phonetically. The meaning isn't as important as the intent." I took a deep breath and began to read. "Spiritus Vinctus, Libertas Quirens, Dolor Infinitus, Finus Tempus." The moment I spoke the first words, the psychic assault began. I was suddenly experiencing Serena's memories. Her pain, her terror as they strapped her to the chair day after day, forcing her to use her abilities until her body began to break down. But it wasn't just Serena's memories. I could feel the experiences of every person who had been experimented on in this facility. The man with the surgical scars who had been subjected to experimental brain surgery while conscious. The woman who had been kept in sensory deprivation for weeks until she lost her mind. The elderly man who had been used as a test subject for new drugs that caused excruciating pain. Continue, Serena urged. You have to finish the entire ritual. I forced myself to keep reading, even as the psychic trauma threatened to overwhelm my sanity. Mortem transcendere, vincula romper, anime liberi, pax aeternam. The pain was indescribable. It felt like my mind was being torn apart. Like every nerve in my body was on fire. I could feel decades of accumulated suffering flowing through me. The final moments of dozens of murder victims. The desperation of people who had been forgotten and abandoned by their families. Almost there, Serena called out. Just a few more lines. Through the haze of psychic agony, I could see that changes were beginning to occur in the room. The carved symbols on the floor were starting to glow. The temperature was rising. The organic growth on the walls was beginning to wither and fall away. Vincula dissolve. I read, my voice barely recognizable. Spiritus labora, dolor finire. Requires concede. Suddenly, the room filled with a brilliant white light. The psychic assault reached its peak. I felt like I was experiencing the death of every person who had ever been trapped in this facility. But along with the pain came something else. Relief, gratitude, the overwhelming joy of souls finally being released from decades of torment. The light began to fade. I found myself lying on the floor of the room, my body shaking uncontrollably. But I was alive. I was still myself. The ritual had worked without destroying my mind. Serena knelt beside me, and for the first time, she looked peaceful. The blood stains on her hospital gown were fading. The electrode burns on her temples were healing. She was becoming translucent. Fading away. Thank you, she whispered. We're free. We can finally rest. All around the room, other spirits were appearing. The experiment victims. The forgotten residents from upstairs. Even Nurse Patricia was there, but she looked different. Younger. Kinder, like the person she had been before the corruption of the facility had changed her. We're sorry, Nurse Patricia said. We didn't understand what we were doing. We were trapped by our own pain and loneliness. We didn't mean to threaten you. One by one, the spirits began to fade away, moving on to whatever comes after death. Finally finding the peace that had been denied to them for so long. The last to leave was Serena. The building will collapse soon, she warned me. The psychic energy that was holding it together is gone. Get your friend and leave quickly. Wait, I called out. What about the bodies in the freezers? Shouldn't someone know what happened here? Serena smiled. That's already taken care of, she said. The authorities will receive an anonymous tip tomorrow. The families of the victims will finally have answers. And the people responsible for these crimes will face justice. Even if most of them are dead. As Serena faded away completely, I struggled to my feet. The building around me was beginning to shake. Cracks were appearing in the walls. Dust was falling from the ceiling. I had to find Rowan and get out of there immediately. I ran back up to the basement level and found Rowan exactly where I had left him. But his eyes were clear now. Alert. He looked confused, but otherwise normal. What happened? He asked. The last thing I remember was following you down here. I'll explain later, I said, grabbing his arm. Right now we need to get out of here. The building is collapsing. As we ran through the corridors toward the exit, I could hear the structure groaning and settling around us. Windows were shattering. Support beams were cracking. The Whitmore retirement home was finally dying, taking its secrets and its horrors with it. We burst through the side entrance, just as the first section of roof collapsed. Behind us, the 4-story building was imploding. But there was something beautiful about it. Something peaceful, like it was finally being allowed to rest. Rowan and I stood in the parking lot, watching the destruction. Did we really see all that? He asked. Or was it some kind of mass hallucination? It was real, I assured him. All of it, the residents, the experiments, Serena, all real, I repeated. But they're free now. They can finally move on. As the building finished collapsing, I noticed something that made me smile. In the rubble, I could see that lone wheelchair that had been positioned in the parking lot. But it wasn't facing the building anymore. It was turned toward the forest, toward the road, toward freedom. We drove home in silence, both of us processing what we had experienced, what we had witnessed, what we had somehow survived. It wasn't until we were back in civilization that Rowan finally spoke. "Do you think anyone will believe us?" he asked. "Probably not," I admitted. "But that doesn't matter. What matters is that we helped them. We did something good." "Yeah," Rowan nodded. "We did." The next morning, I woke up to find a news story on my phone. Anonymous tip leads to discovery of mass grave at former retirement home site. The article described how investigators had found the bodies of dozens of elderly people buried on the grounds of the old Whitmore retirement home. The discovery was leading to a reopened investigation into the facility's activities in the 1970s and 1980s. I smiled as I read the article. Serena had kept her promise. The victims would finally receive proper burials. Their families would have closure. And the truth about what happened at Whitmore would finally come to light. But the story wasn't quite over. Over the next few months, I began receiving messages from other urban explorers, people who had visited abandoned facilities similar to Whitmore. They were reporting similar experiences, encounters with spirits, requests for help, pleas for freedom. I realized that Whitmore wasn't unique. There were other places, other facilities where similar experiments had taken place. Other groups of spirits trapped by their own trauma and pain. Rowan and I began planning new expeditions. We had found our true calling. We weren't just urban explorers anymore. We were spiritual investigators, helping trapped souls find peace, bringing justice to the forgotten victims of institutional abuse. It's been 3 years since that night at Whitmore. Rowan and I have helped free over 200 trapped spirits from various abandoned facilities across the country. Each case is different. Each group of spirits has their own story, their own pain, their own need for justice. But they all have one thing in common. They've been forgotten by the world, abandoned by the living, left to suffer alone in the places where they died. Until someone cares enough to help them. Someone brave enough to risk everything to give them peace. The work is dangerous. I've been hospitalized twice from psychic trauma. Rowan has had several complete nervous breakdowns. But we continue because we know how important it is. We know what it means to these lost souls. And sometimes, late at night when I'm having trouble sleeping, I think I can still hear Serena's voice, whispering thank you on the wind, reminding me that every spirit we help find peace is one less soul suffering in the darkness. The abandoned places are still out there, still hiding their secrets, still holding their trapped spirits. But they don't have to suffer alone anymore, because there are people who care, people who remember, people who are willing to risk everything to help the forgotten find peace. If you're watching this video, if you've made it this far, then maybe you understand. Maybe you're someone who cares about the forgotten, the abandoned, the lost souls who need our help. I want to thank you all for watching this terrifying journey with me. The story of Whitmore Retirement Home is just one of many that Rowan and I have experienced over the years. Each investigation has taught us something new about the spirit world, about the importance of remembering those who have been forgotten. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about our paranormal investigations, please hit that subscribe button. Your support means everything to us and helps us continue this important work. Also, make sure to smash that like button if this story gave you chills, and ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest supernatural encounters. I'd love to know what you thought about this experience. Drop a comment below and tell me which part of the investigation scared you the most. Was it the dinner scene with the ghostly residents? The discovery of the medical experiments in the basement? Or the terrifying ritual in the sub-basement? Let me know in the comments. Also, I'm curious about your own experiences with the paranormal. Have any of you ever explored abandoned buildings? Have you encountered spirits or unexplained phenomena? If you have any ghost stories or supernatural experiences of your own, please share them in the comments below. I read every single comment, and I love hearing about your encounters with the unknown. For those of you who want to share longer stories or more detailed experiences, you can always email me directly. The address is in the description below. I'm always looking for new locations to investigate and new stories to share with our community. Speaking of new content, I want to know what types of paranormal investigations you'd like to see next. Are you interested in more abandoned hospitals and medical facilities? Would you like to hear about haunted schools or old asylums? Or maybe you'd prefer stories about private homes with supernatural activity? Let me know in the comments what topics interest you most. We're also considering doing some live investigations where you can watch us explore haunted locations in real time. Would that be something you'd be interested in? The thought of having all of you with us during these investigations is both exciting and terrifying. I also want to remind everyone that what we do is extremely dangerous. Please don't attempt to recreate any of our investigations on your own. Many of these abandoned buildings are structurally unsafe, and the spiritual encounters we experience require years of preparation and protection rituals. If you're interested in paranormal investigation, please find experienced investigators in your area who can teach you proper safety procedures. Before I sign off, I want to address something that several viewers have asked about. Yes, the psychological impact of these investigations is very real. Both Rowan and I work with therapists who specialize in trauma counseling. Experiencing the pain and memories of trapped spirits takes a toll on your mental health, and it's important to have professional support. If any of you are dealing with your own supernatural experiences and need someone to talk to, please don't hesitate to reach out, whether through the comments, email, or social media. Our community is here to support each other. Sometimes just knowing that others believe your experiences can make all the difference. I also want to take a moment to honor all the spirits we've encountered over the years. People like Serena, Nurse Patricia, and all the residents of Whitmore who suffered in life and death. Their stories matter. Their pain was real, and their need for justice and peace should never be forgotten. By sharing these stories, we're ensuring that their memories live on. For our international viewers, I know many of you have similar locations in your own countries. Places where institutional abuse occurred, where spirits might be trapped. If you know of such locations and think we might be able to help, please let us know. We're always willing to travel if it means helping more lost souls find peace. I want to give a special shout out to Rowan, who has been my partner in these investigations from the beginning. His courage and dedication to helping trapped spirits is truly inspiring. And to all of you who have supported our channel from the early days, thank you for believing in what we do, for understanding the importance of this work, and for helping us reach more people who might need to hear these stories. As we continue to grow our community of paranormal investigators and supernatural enthusiasts, I want to remind everyone that we're not just here for entertainment. We're here to make a real difference, to help souls find peace, and to bring justice to those who have been forgotten by the world. So once again, thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting our mission. And thank you for caring about the spirits who need our help. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that like button. And let me know in the comments what you'd like to see in our next investigation. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember that sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones that end with hope, with justice, and with peace for those who have suffered for far too long. Thanks for joining me on this incredible and terrifying journey. I'll see you all in the next video.